Tonight, more in our continuing investigation into the witch hunt against the community activist group ACORN. The corporate roots of that witch hunt, its baldly dishonest tactics, and its ultimate dislocation from the warranted facts. The ongoing effort to destroy and demonize ACORN has been led, for the most part, by conservative media outlets. And its biggest accomplishment so far has been the decision by Congress last week to strip ACORN of all federal funding. The Defund ACORN Act of 2009 passed through both houses of Congress with big bipartisan support. That said, one problem with the Defund ACORN Act is that it appears to be really unconstitutional. In constitutional terms, the Defund ACORN Act has what's called a Bill of Attainder problem. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. It's one of those things from constitutional law that sounds really obscure and impenetrable, like the Commerce Clause or the Privacy Penumbra, but it's actually sort of easy. In Article 1 of the Constitution, it says bills of attainder are banned. And that just means that you can't pass legislation that directly targets one individual or one specific group of people. In this case, the Congressional Research Service looked into the Defund ACORN Act of 2009 to see if it specifically targets anyone. And, of course, they found probable cause that it does. So there's a good possibility that this legislation, which Republicans are so excited to be touting, which they've even gotten all this Democratic support for, there's a good chance that it is really Article 1-style unconstitutional. It's embarrassing. They're going to want to run on the anti-ACORN platform all the way to 2010 if passed as any prologue. So what to do? How to salvage the Defund ACORN Act? Well, they're going to need to make sure that it doesn't violate the Constitution as baldly as it seems to now. So where the Defund ACORN Act says it's going to cut off funding for an organization that's ever been indicted for breaking campaign finance laws, or that's ever filed fraudulent paperwork with any state or federal agency, if this is going to be constitutional, that can't only be enforced against this one group. Can't only be enforced against ACORN. It's got to be for everyone. So giant government defense contractors, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, looks like you're out of luck. Lockheed Martin has been forced to pay at least $68 million for getting caught 11 separate times committing government contract fraud. Northrop Grumman has had to pay around $500 million for getting caught 9 times for contract fraud. Sorry, guys, but if we're going to nail ACORN here, you got to go. And if fraud is going to be the new issue in our newfound enthusiasm for defunding people, then Blackwater's going to have a problem too. In just one of Blackwater's many government contracts, they were recently found to have defrauded the government to the tune of $55 million. And that's just one Blackwater contract, and they've got lots of contracts. But if fraud's not bad enough for you, how about murder? Because 5 Blackwater employees have been charged with murder during the course of their government-contracted duties in Iraq. Is murder enough to defund Blackwater? How about if the people they're killing, the contractors are killing, aren't just Iraqi civilians or somebody else we don't know? How about if they're U.S. troops? Because KBR, with its government contracts, is under investigation for killing 16 American troops who were electrocuted through KBR's shoddy work supposedly building and maintaining living quarters for our troops in Iraq. And okay, I mean, to be fair, I will admit that if we are talking about behavior by contractors that warrants them being defunded by an outraged Congress, none of those things I just described from those other contractors are prostitution-specific, like the Republican and conservative media ACORN case has been, ever since 2 conservative activists dressed up in pimp and hooker costumes and then went from ACORN office to ACORN office with a hidden camera until they got a reaction out of ACORN employees that would play well on Fox News. If the hidden camera stunt-induced prostitution angle is what it takes to get a government contractor defunded, then I guess we're going to have to talk about prostitution broadly and the government contractor known as Armor Group, part of Wackenhut in Afghanistan. Their employees, you will recall, were made famous earlier this month after the release of these pictures that show the contractors barely clothed and shooting vodka out of places you wouldn't expect. The same Armor Group personnel, who again were being paid by you and me, were also allegedly engaged in a prostitution ring in Kabul. That's according to an Armor Group whistleblower. The State Department is investigating Armor Group now. But if we're going to talk contractors and prostitution, we're also going to have to talk about DynCorp, which has always been one of those horror movie U.S. contractor cases. In the year 2000, at least 13 DynCorp employees were sent home from a U.S. government contract in Bosnia after they were found to be taking part in a Bosnian sex slave ring involving underage girls. Not a fake prostitution ring that never actually existed, like the one in the activist hidden camera costume stunt, but an actual forced child prostitution ring and actual U.S. government contractors from DynCorp. In the absence of any defund DynCorp uprising, DynCorp still gets a lot of government money. In fact, today, DynCorp landed a brand new $230 million contract with the U.S. Air Force. That's on top of the $915 million contract they got from the State Department in June. Armor Group, the prostitution/vodka shooting contractor in Afghanistan at the Kabul embassy, they've still got that nearly $200 million contract in Afghanistan with the State Department, though that is currently under review. Blackwater still has multi-million-dollar contracts with the State Department, the Defense Department, as well as the CIA, even as 5 of their employees face murder charges. KBR was just awarded a new $19 million Army contract in February, despite being investigated in the deaths of those 16 U.S. troops. Not only have these contractors not been defunded by outraged members of Congress, they all continue to get spectacularly lucrative government contracts, even after all of these things have been exposed. I'm not reporting any of these things for the first time. They're all known. So sure, if you want to defund ACORN, go for it. ACORN has definitely done some indefensible stuff over the years. They are an imperfect organization, to be sure. But if this isn't just a witch hunt against ACORN, if Congress is actually just going after government contractors who commit fraud and worse, then we can all look forward to the explanation from the fake outraged Republicans and the cowering Democrats about why nothing ever inspired them to defund anyone before ACORN. After that, by all means, cut them all loose. Joining us now is Jeremy Scahill, correspondent for The Nation and author of the New York Times bestseller, Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. Mr. Scahill, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
I apologize for being a little hot under the collar about this. I'm riled up by this story.
Everyone should be.
Yeah. If miraculously the defund ACORN language survives as it is, are defense contractors at all worried about Congress actually cutting them off?
Absolutely not. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is this. The Democrats, and there were a lot of them that voted with the Republicans on this. In fact, only 75 Democrats voted against this Defund ACORN Act in the House, and only a handful of senators voted against it on the other side. The fact is that some of the best congresspeople on the issue of war contractors have never come forward and introduced a Defund Blackwater Act or a Defund DynCorp Act. Claire McCaskill, who actually has been a pit bull on the contracting issue, she voted in favor of defunding ACORN and yet hasn't proposed legislation to go after any of these war contractors. Look, Rachel, as you know, this is political. This isn't really about upholding the law. On the one hand, you have an organization that registered 1.3 million people to vote, 400,000 members, works with the poor and working class people of this nation. They don't have lobbying power in the form of massive campaign contributions. On the other side, you have 600 war corporations right now on the U.S. government payroll. You want to know an actual election scandal? 25 to 40 cents on every dollar we spend on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, $2.5 billion a week. That money goes directly to these war corporations, who in turn contribute campaign dollars to the Republicans and Democrats who continue to fund their operations. That's the real scandal here.
The thing that is, I think, frustrating about the ACORN story, and that's, I think, part of the reason that I do have this sort of unexpected emotion about it. I mean, we talk about a lot of outrageous things all the time, but I'm really, the story really grabs me. It's the reason we're going to be doing it for a few days. It's because ACORN doesn't have to be a sainted organization. They don't have to be perfect in order for what's being done to them to be an outrage. And I guess I'm trying to contextualize them against other contractors in order to understand whether or not their sins ought to be being discussed before the sins of organizations like Blackwater.
Okay, let's look at this. If there ever was a moment where there should have been a standard where individuals should have been held accountable for the crimes of others, it would have been the Bush folks when it came to the torture program. It would have been Eric Prince when it came to the operations of Blackwater. What we're talking about here in the case of ACORN is $53 million in federal funding over 15 years that largely went for low-income housing, poor people housing. And on the other hand, you're talking about an equivalent amount of money that Halliburton got every single day for its operations in Iraq, that Blackwater may have to repay the government for not living up to the terms of just one contract. The fact of the matter is that ACORN got pennies compared to what these massive war contracting firms got. And as you point out rightly, we're talking about murder, we're talking about child prostitution, we're talking about all sorts of misconduct against American personnel and against innocent civilians. The crimes of ACORN, if there are those that are litigated in a court of law, pale in comparison to the crimes of the war contractors that go unconfronted by Democrats and Republicans.
Do you see Democrats changing their mind on this? We saw such huge Democratic votes in favor of these Republican defund ACORN bills. Do you see that? Do you think that that sentiment is reversible among Democrats?
Well, look, if Representative Alan Grayson of Florida is the only person who's going to come forward and say, yeah, let's go after it, let's defund all these criminal organizations, and the rest of the Democrats, like Claire McCaskill, did it as part of a witch hunt against ACORN, then it's a sad day in this country, because what it means is there is no spine in that Congress when it comes to standing up against the real crooks and criminals in this society. It's an outrage.
Jeremy Scahill, correspondent for The Nation, author of Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, of course, New York Times bestseller. Jeremy, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
It's an honor to be with you, Rachel.